Please be seated. Good evening. I now call the case number 190201, Carlin George versus Naylor Stirgram. All right, please be certain that all cell phones, electronic devices are turned off so that we don't have any disruptions during the trial. And we have our timekeepers in place. All right. And have the teams provided your team rosters to the judges?
No, Your Honor. May I do so at this time?
Yes, please do.
Permission to approach the jury?
Yes, you may.
And I believe the plaintiff already has supplied you one for Your Honor.
Oh, yes. Thank you.
Your Honor, may I approach?
Yes, you may.
Here. Oh, thank you.
Thank you. All right. If I could have the plaintiff, please, if each of you would please introduce yourselves by name and the role that you'll be playing in the trial, but don't tell us what school you're from.
Yes, Your Honor. I'll introduce the competing plaintiff team. My name is Fawaz Shukfe, and along with my co-counsel, Wesley Trook and Stephanie Gundur, I'll be representing the plaintiff in today's case, Carlin George, as represented by Kiva Weeks. We'll also be calling 2 additional witnesses to the stand, including Murphy Edwards, as portrayed by Arj Rahman, and Chase Ford, as portrayed by William McKibben. And with that, Your Honor, the plaintiff is ready to proceed, addressing pretrial matters later.
All right, thank you very much. Now, if the defendant would each of you please state your name and what role you will be playing without telling us what school you're from.
Yes, Your Honor. We are Defense Team D. I am Grace Burgess. I will be directing Sean Wallace and crossing Chase Ford.
My name is Rachel Jagaman. I will be directing Naylor Stirgram, crossing Murphy Edwards, and delivering the closing argument.
My name is Emma Clifton. I will be delivering the opening statement, directing Jackie Gleason, and crossing Carlin George.
My name is Callan Smith, and I'm Jackie Gleason.
My name is Maddie Hornell, and I'm Sean Wallace.
My name is Luke Barber, and I'm Naylor Stagram.
All right, thank you very much. Now, if I could have all the witnesses please stand, and I will swear you all in at this time. Do you and each of you promise that the testimony you are about to give will faithfully and truthfully conform to the facts and rules of the mock trial competition?
Yes, Your Honor.
All right, thank you. Please be seated. All right. Plaintiff, are there any preliminary matters that you wish to raise with the court at this time?
Yes, Your Honor. The plaintiff would like to note that both parties have entered into 10 stipulations, which are already considered a part of the evidentiary record pursuant mock trial competition rule 4.2. Next, Your Honor, we would like to ask for permission to move about the well of the courtroom for both ourselves and opposing counsel during openings, closings, direct examination, and cross-examination.
You may do so.
And finally, Your Honor, with that, the plaintiff is ready to proceed.
All right, thank you. Defense, do you have any pretrial or preliminary matters that you wish to take up with the court at this time?
The defense is ready to proceed, Your Honor.
All right, thank you very much. All right. Plaintiff, are you ready to present your opening statement?
With one quick moment to get the microphone set up. Yes, Your Honor. May it please the court. Your Honor, members of the jury, the satire spectacle was supposed to be the most spectacular comedy event ever. Thousands of people began to buy tickets after one of the most popular and well-respected influencers on social media, Naylor, Stirgram, said that it would be the greatest event in history. It's a no-brainer. You have to go to the satire spectacle. These two were the thoughts of the plaintiff, Carlin George, in the weeks leading up to the event. After hearing of the luxurious villa she would stay in, the top-notch food and drink she would receive, and the rare opportunity to visit the beautiful Yarborough Island, Miss George was more than excited to buy tickets and attend what Mr. Stagram had led her to believe was the event of a lifetime. But when Miss George got to Yarborough Island, she quickly discovered that she would receive none of the amenities that were promised. Additionally, she found herself without water and dehydrated. After searching the island for hours, evidence will show that Miss George found nothing to drink except for collected rainwater. And the next thing she remembers is waking up in a hospital bed, where she remained for 4 full days on the brink of death. But why? Why did what was supposed to be the event of a lifetime nearly lead to the death of Carlin George? The answer lies in what Miss George didn't realize was happening behind the scenes of the satire spectacle. That the defendant, Naylor Stirgram, knew the celebrity that first convinced Miss George to buy tickets to the event, was well aware of the disastrous conditions, and yet promoted the event anyway, knowing it was a disaster. You will hear that Naylor Stirgram left Carlin George with no choice. You will also learn from Mr. Chase Ford, the primary organizer of the satire spectacle, that he brought Naylor Stirgram to Yarborough Island on June 18th to see the disastrous conditions, but was subsequently threatened by Stirgram, who became furious at the idea of canceling. Naylor Stirgram then left Chase Ford with no choice. Now, as the plaintiff, it is our burden to prove by a preponderance of the evidence that the defendant, Naylor Stirgram, was well aware of the disastrous conditions on Yarborough Island and yet continued to promote the event anyway. We must also show that the plaintiff, Carlin George, was reasonable to believe these promotions and, as a result, became ill. We will meet this burden. And to do so, we will call 3 witnesses to the stand. First, you will hear from the plaintiff, Carlin George, who will testify that she was reasonable in believing Naylor Stirgram's promotions for the event, especially after he went as far as discrediting other sources that told the truth about the event. You will learn that Miss Stirgram had no option on Yarborough Island but to drink collected rainwater. Second, you will hear from Mr. Murphy Edwards, who will testify to the conditions of Yarborough Island when Mr. Stirgram visited that day on June 18th. And you will hear that he has an eyewitness account of what Stirgram seemed to be frustrated about leaving the island that day. Finally, you will hear from Chase Ford, the primary organizer of the event, the CEO of Vision himself. And you will hear that Chase Ford pleaded. He tried everything he could to get Mr. Stirgram to cancel the event on June 18th, but was subsequently threatened by Stirgram, who knew that should the event be canceled, he would lose at least $125,000 at minimum. While we have the burden to prove our case, we expect that the defense will attempt to pin the blame on anyone but themselves. But as they do this, remember, we don't even need to prove that Naylor Stirgram caused the failure of the satire spectacle, but rather he knew that it would fail and yet continued to promote the event anyway. You will learn that Naylor Stirgram prevented Chase Ford from canceling the event, and Naylor Stirgram was the reason as to why the plaintiff was on Yarborough Island during the satire spectacle, and that Naylor Stirgram left Chase Ford and Carlin George with no choice. But ladies and gentlemen of the jury, at the end of the trial, you will still have your choice. And so we will ask you to make the right one and find in favor of justice, find in favor of the plaintiff, and hold Naylor Stirgram liable for defrauding Carlin George. Thank you.
Thank you, counsel. Defense, are you ready to present your opening statement?
Yes, Your Honor. May I proceed?
You may.
Your Honor, opposing counsel, members of the jury. Imagine you're walking down the street and you see a sign in a coffee shop window that says, "World's Best Coffee." I don't know about you, but I wouldn't take that sign at face value. And regardless of whether or not the sign is true, it's your decision whether to go in and buy a cup of coffee, and it's the coffee maker's responsibility to provide you with a decent cup of coffee. Let's add another layer to this analogy. You're walking down the street and you see a person in front of a coffee shop holding a sign that says, "World's Best Coffee." Now, this person isn't making the coffee. They haven't even tried the coffee. They were just paid by the coffee shop to hold the sign. But let's say you go inside and you buy a cup of coffee, and it's the worst cup of coffee you have ever tasted. Whose fault is it that the coffee's terrible? The random person outside holding the sign? Or the person who made the coffee? The answer is obvious. But in today's case, the plaintiff has chosen to sue the one standing outside holding the sign, Naylor Stirgram. The plaintiff will claim that the failure of the event is the advertiser's responsibility. However, the evidence will show that the failure of the event and everything that happened there lies on the shoulders of the organizer. In April of 2018, one of the plaintiff's favorite celebrities, Naylor Stirgram, was hired by Chase Ford to advertise for a 2-day comedy festival known as the Satire Spectacle. The festival quickly generated attraction. There were going to be great accommodations, gourmet food, first-class amenities, and an amazing lineup of comedians. Notably, Mr. Stirgram was not responsible for providing any of these things. Mr. Stirgram's only responsibility was to advertise for the event on social media. However, Chase Ford, the director of the Satire Spectacle, was responsible for providing every single one of these things. But in the end, Mr. Ford was not able to deliver any of the things he promised. Thousands of people showed up for the event, but there were only enough seats for a few hundred. None of the promised amenities were provided. There wasn't enough food and water to last through the first day, and when a storm hit the island, what little shelter Mr. Ford had provided proved completely useless to protect the guests from the wind and the rain. Amidst all the chaos, the plaintiff, Carlin George, was left dehydrated and exhausted. Miss George drank some water out of a collapsed tent and tried to get some sleep. But when she woke up, she became very sick. But contrary to what Mr. Trook told you, Miss George did not get sick because of Naylor Stirgram. Miss George had to be rushed to the hospital because Chase Ford did not provide her with proper food, water, or shelter. Today, the plaintiff bears the burden of proof. which means they must prove every single element of their case by a preponderance of the evidence. They must show that Mr. Stirgram made a false statement, knew it was false when he made it, and that Carlin George reasonably relied on that information, resulting in her injury. And if the plaintiff fails to prove any one of these elements, you must rule in favor of the defense. The plaintiff will claim that the failure of the event is the advertiser's responsibility. However, the evidence will show that Carlin George suffered her injury because Chase Ford did not provide her with proper food, water, or shelter. In the coffee shop analogy, the blame clearly lies on the one who made the coffee. And in today's case, the blame clearly lies with Chase Ford. That is why at the end of today's trial, we will ask that you find Mr. Stirgram not liable. Thank you.
Thank you, counsel. Plaintiff, call your first witness.
The plaintiff now calls Carlin George to the stand.
Ms. George.
Good evening, Mrs. George. Please introduce yourself to the jury.
Hello, my name is Carlin George, and I'm 25 years old.
How do you know Naylor Stagram?
Well, I found Stagram a while back on this really cool app called Chirpster. Because we share many of the same interests, like comedy, he was one of my favorites.
And how did you learn about the Satire Spectacle?
The Satire Spectacle was a comedy event that Stagram started promoting around April of 2018. Since I've been a fan of comedy for quite some time, this instantly caught my attention.
What did you do after you saw Naylor Stagram promoting this event?
In May, I decided to buy a regular ticket from the link in Stagram's chirp.
How much was this regular ticket?
It was $500.
Did you ever upgrade your ticket package?
Actually, yes, I did. On June 18th, I upgraded to the select ticket.
From where did you purchase this select ticket package?
I bought it from the link in Stagram's chirp.
At around this time, do you recall seeing any negative media surrounding the Satire Spectacle?
Yes, I remember seeing an article. I believe it came from the Texome Alternative.
Now, how did this article influence the way you viewed the event, if at all?
The article was a known conspiracy blog, and Stagram kept chirping on and on about how successful the event was going to be. So I figured I had nothing to worry about when it came to people who doubted the event.
Did any of Mrs. Stagram's chirps affirm that fact?
Actually, yes, one of them did.
Your Honor, permission to approach Mrs. George with a copy of Exhibit 1, pages 3, 4, and 5.
You may.
I'm now tendering a copy of Exhibit 1, pages 3, 4, and 5 to opposing counsel. Mrs. George, I'm now approaching you with a copy of Exhibit 1, pages 3, 4, and 5. Do you recognize these documents?
Yes, I do.
And what are those?
These are some of Stagram's chirps that he sent out pertaining to the Satire Spectacle.
And do any of those chirps appear to have been altered in any way?
No, not that I can tell.
Your Honor, the plaintiff now offers Exhibit 1, pages 3, 4, and 5 into evidence. Their authenticity has been stipulated.
Any objection?
No objection, Your Honor.
All right. Exhibit 1 is admitted.
And, Your Honor, may I publish a couple of copies to the jury?
Yes, you may.
Now, Mrs. George, which one of Mrs. Stagram's chirps was it that affirmed you had nothing to worry about?
The one right here in the middle of page 3.
Can you please read that chirp out for the jury?
Sure. The chirp says, "Don't believe the naysayers. They're just jelly. You need to be at the hashtag Satire Spectacle."
Does that post there mention anything about being a paid advertisement?
No, nothing at all.
So how did you proceed with your plan to attend the Satire Spectacle?
Since it seems Stagram went way out of his way to address the article, I figured I had made a pretty good choice in upgrading to the select ticket.
Speaking of that select ticket, what were you promised when you purchased it from the link in Stagram's chirp?
The select ticket said you would stay in a villa, be given closer seats, and have the opportunity to meet some of the comedians. Like my favorite, Jackie Gleason. She's right over there. I guess I'm getting the chance to meet her after all.
Your Honor, permission to approach Mrs. George with a copy of Exhibit 3.
You may.
I'm now tendering a copy of Exhibit 3 to opposing counsel. Mrs. George, I'm now approaching you with a copy of Exhibit 3. Do you recognize this document?
Yes, I do.
And what is that?
This is exactly what the villas advertised in the select ticket looked like.
And does that appear to be an accurate representation of what you saw advertised?
Yes, I would say so.
Your Honor, the plaintiff now offers Exhibit 3 into evidence. Its authenticity has been stipulated.
Any objection?
No objection, Your Honor.
Exhibit 3 is admitted.
And permission to publish a copy to the jury?
You may.
Now, Mrs. George, let's move on to the first day of the satire spectacle. When was the first day of the satire spectacle?
The first day of the satire spectacle was June 29th of 2018.
And did you leave for Yarborough Island that day?
Yes, I did. I left early that morning and arrived on the island a couple hours later.
How did you spend your first few hours on the island?
I saw the first few couple of stand-up routines from some of the comedians. The first 3 or 4 hours were glorious.
Was your entire time on the island as enjoyable as those first few hours?
Unfortunately, no, it wasn't.
And why was that?
After hearing people yell while stampeding toward the camping area, I got nervous that there wasn't going to be enough housing. So I rushed over to make sure I would get my villa accommodation.
What did you notice when you got to the camping area?
Nothing like the tents I was promised were in sight. They only had these tents, and on top of that, there were not nearly enough tents for everyone there.
Your Honor, permission to approach Mrs. George with a copy of Exhibit 4.
You may.
I'm now tendering a copy of Exhibit 4 to opposing counsel. And Mrs. George, I'm now approaching you with a copy of Exhibit 4. Do you recognize this photograph?
Unfortunately, yes, I do.
And what is this?
This is exactly what the tents looked like the day of the satire spectacle.
And does that appear to be an accurate reflection of what you saw that day?
Yes, I would say so.
Your Honor, the plaintiff now offers Exhibit 4 into evidence. Its authenticity has been stipulated.
Any objection?
No objection, Your Honor.
Exhibit 4 is admitted.
And permission to publish to the jury?
You may.
Now, Mrs. George, does Exhibit 4 look like the accommodation you were promised when you purchased the select ticket from Mrs. Stirgram?
No, absolutely not. When I bought my ticket from Stagram, I was promised this, but I got this instead.
So what did you do about this whole tent situation?
I was barely able to claim a tent with these 2 siblings named Ryan and Jane. And when I say barely, I mean barely.
What did you do shortly after you secured this tent?
I decided to stay guard while Ryan went to go look for some food and water.
What did Ryan bring back for food and water?
He brought back some food that was hardly qualified as edible. And as far as water went, he only brought back 2 bottles to split between himself, Jane, and me. That's 2 bottles for 3 adults.
Now, at around the time that you received this food and water, what did the status of the event appear to be?
I had found out that the event had gotten canceled.
How did you respond to this event cancellation?
Since it was getting dark out, I decided to stay in my tent. But then a monsoon hit the island, completely destroying it.
How did you begin to feel once this monsoon struck the island?
The extreme humidity started making me really, really thirsty. And I had to go out and patch up our tent, and it just made things so much worse.
Were you able to sleep that night?
Unfortunately, no, I wasn't. I was tossing and turning all night.
How did you feel the next morning then?
The morning heat just made things so much worse. I was beginning to feel really dehydrated.
At this point, about how long had it been since you had last consumed water?
Oh, for hours. It was getting to the point where I just couldn't take it anymore.
So what did you do?
I started wandering around the island looking for a water bottle, a water fountain, or something, anything of that nature, but I couldn't find anything.
Did you find anything else though?
Yes, I did.
And what did you find?
I found what seemed to be my only viable option. It was a small puddle of rainwater that I had found in the bottom of an upturned tent.
Did you drink that rainwater, Mrs. George?
Yes, I did.
And why did you drink it?
None of the water that I was promised I could seem to find on the island. So it was either take the risk of drinking the water or just pass out.
Now, did the water at least appear to be safe at the time you consumed it?
As far as I could tell, yes, it was.
And did you begin to feel a bit better?
Actually, yes, I did. I was finally able to get a couple hours sleep.
How did you feel after you got some sleep?
So much worse. I tried to stand up to get ready to go, but I threw up instantly, and then all I could do was ball up on the floor of the tent because I was so nauseous.
What happened after that?
I don't really remember. The next few days were sort of hazy.
Then what is the next thing that you remember, Mrs. George?
The next thing I remember is waking up late on July 1st in Texoma Coast Hospital.
What did you learn at the hospital?
The doctors treated me for what they said was dehydration and waterborne bacteria.
Finally, Mrs. George, what were you expecting when you decided to attend the satire spectacle?
Since Naylor Stagram was my source of information pertaining to the satire spectacle, and he kept advertising it as amazing, I figured I would be attending a really fun comedy event, not get sick from drinking rainwater. I just wish he would have told me the truth.
Thank you, Mrs. George. No further questions at this time, Your Honor. I now pass the witness.
Cross-examination?
Yes, Your Honor. May I proceed?
Yes, you may.
Good evening, Miss George. I'm going to ask you a few questions about what you and Mr. Shookfay talked about a couple minutes ago.
Okay, that's fine.
Now, as you said on direct, your upgraded ticket promised you villas, right?
Yes, and many other things.
However, Mr. Stirgram never promised you these villas.
I would disagree with that.
Mr. Stirgram never mentioned villas in any of his posts, did he?
He supplied the link, which supplied the advertisements. So yes, he actually did.
Mr. Stirgram never mentioned that you would be given villas directly in those posts, correct?
He gave me the link, which was directly related to the advertisements. So yes.
And Mr. Stirgram also did not include any pictures directly in his post of the villas, correct?
No, just the links that had the pictures in them.
Now, you also said that your ticket promised you gourmet food, didn't it?
Yes.
But Mr. Stirgram never promised you this gourmet food.
Again, I would disagree with that. He mentioned it multiple times in his chirps and through the links.
Your Honor, may I approach the witness?
Yes, you may.
Now, Miss George, can you please show me where in Mr. Stirgram's chirps he mentions gourmet food?
Not all of his chirps are here, but some of them did promote that.
I'd be happy to get the rest of them for you. Your Honor, may I approach the witness with the remaining pages of Exhibit 1?
You may.
Let the record reflect I am showing a copy of these 2 pages to opposing counsel, Mr. Shookfay. Miss George, do you recognize these 2 pages?
Yes, I would say so.
And have these 2 pages, and what are these pages?
Again, these are some of Stagram's chirps that he sent out pertaining to the satire spectacle.
And have these been changed in any way?
Not that I can tell, no.
Your Honor, I move to admit the rest of Exhibit 1 into evidence.
Any objection?
No objections, Your Honor.
All right. These, how many pages are those? 2?
Yes, Your Honor.
All right. These 2 additional pages, part of Exhibit 1, are also admitted.
Now, Miss George, can you please show me where Mr. Stirgram mentions gourmet food in those chirps?
Sure. The last chirp on page 2 said, I'm headed to Yarborough Island tomorrow with my bestie at Jackie Gleason to get the preview of the satire spectacle. Swanky beach accommodations, killer food, and the best stand-up acts in the business. Why didn't something think of this before? Can't wait to see all of you there laughing your buns off at the beach. Get your tickets now, because this event is going to rock. At Chirpster, and there's his link, from Naylor Stagram.
Thank you, Miss George. Now, nowhere in any of that chirp did he mention gourmet food, did he?
I kind of guessed that because he kept advertising as amazing, killer food wouldn't actually kill me.
Now, Miss George, you have no personal relationship with Mr. Stirgram, correct?
Not a personal one, no.
In fact, you've never had a conversation with Mr. Stirgram, have you?
Not in person.
So the only communication you've had with Mr. Stirgram is through Chirpster, correct?
That's correct, yes.
And you bought your ticket for the festival from a link in one of Mr. Stirgram's chirps, didn't you?
My source of information, yes, I did.
And you bought your ticket for the event before Mr. Stirgram mentioned anything about the accommodations for the event, correct?
Tickets were selling fast, and he kept advertising as amazing. So, yes, I did.
And you also bought your ticket for the event before Mr. Stirgram said anything about the food for the event, correct?
Yes, you could say so.
Now, you also upgraded your ticket from a link in one of Mr. Stirgram's later posts, correct?
Yes, my trusted source.
And this upgraded ticket cost you an extra $2,000. Isn't that right?
It was worth it.
Now, as you said on Direct, you came across an article written by Jason Pierce, correct?
The conspiracy blog, yes.
And you disregarded this post, didn't you?
They talk about aliens. Yes, I did.
So you disregarded this article that gave you contradictory information to what Mr. Stirgram told you,
The
correct?
conspiracy blog, yes.
So, other than looking at Mr. Stirgram's chirps, you did no other research on a ticket you spent $2,500 on. Isn't that
I had
right?
no other trusted source, so yes.
Now, Miss George, if you could please look at the first page of Exhibit 1.
Yes, ma'am.
At the bottom of the page is the chirp that's sent out on May 1st, correct?
Yes, it is.
And in that chirp, there's a link to buy tickets. And after that link is a hyphen, and after that hyphen are 2 words. Could you please read those 2 words out loud to the jury?
Paid advertisement. The one at the top of page 1 does not have that.
Objection, Your Honor, non-responsive.
I'll sustain.
I move to strike everything after the word yes.
Everything after the word yes is stricken.
Now, Miss George, you would agree that this post is clearly labeled as a paid advertisement, correct?
As I just read, yes.
And as far as you know, Mr. Stirgram was not responsible for ensuring there were enough accommodations for the event.
Objection, Your Honor. It calls for speculation.
Response?
Your Honor, if the witness does not know the answer to my question, she is free to answer that she does not know.
May I respond, Your Honor?
Overruled.
Miss George, as far as you know, Mr. Stirgram was not responsible for ensuring there were enough accommodations for the event, was he?
I have no idea what his job entailed.
In fact, you have no personal knowledge of whether Mr. Stirgram knew about the accommodations you were going to be given, correct?
I would disagree. I don't see why he would promote something he had no clue about.
But Miss George, you have no personal knowledge of what Mr. Stirgram knew, correct?
No, I was not in his head.
And as far as you know, Mr. Stirgram also was not responsible for ensuring there was enough food and water for the event, was he?
Again, I have no idea. I just know what he put in his chirps.
And you have no personal knowledge of whether Mr. Stirgram knew about the lack of food and water on the island, do you?
Again, no. Why would I? I only knew what he told me, which was positive things.
So you relied on these advertisements, not knowing what the advertiser knew about the event, correct?
That's incorrect.
Miss George, you just testified that you have no personal knowledge to what Mr. Stirgram knew, correct?
That's correct.
So you did not know what Mr. Stirgram knew when you bought your ticket, correct?
That is not what I'm disagreeing with, but that's also correct.
So you bought your ticket not knowing what Mr. Stirgram knew about the event, correct?
Not personally. No, I did not.
Thank you, Miss George. No further questions, Your Honor.
Any redirect?
Yes, Your Honor. Brief redirect. Now, Mrs. George, do you recall the date of the chirp from which you purchased the select ticket for the satire spectacle?
Which ticket?
The upgraded select ticket.
I believe it came from June 17th, 18th, around that time.
And is that chirp in front of you?
Yes, it is.
Now, permission to approach the Mrs.
may.
George to refer to it. Now, does that chirp mention anything about being a paid advertisement?
No, nowhere.
Thank you, Mrs. George. No further questions at this time, Your Honor.
Any recross?
No recross, Your Honor. May I publish all of Exhibit 1 to the jury?
You may.
I believe it is now in order.
Your Honor, may I ask that my witness step down?
Yes, you may step down.
Your Honor, at this point, the plaintiff now calls Mr. Murphy Edwards to the stand.
All right. Mr. Edwards, please take the witness stand.
And before I begin, Your Honor, may I inquire as to how much time I have left for direct examination?
15 minutes and 2 seconds.
Hello, Mr. Edwards. Please introduce yourself to the jury.
Hi, my name is Murphy Edwards. I'm 22 years old, and I live right here in Texoma.
And could you tell us a little bit about what exactly you do for a living?
Of course. I'm a contractor, but I'd say I specialize more in large-scale entertainment.
And what experience do you have as a contractor?
Gosh, I've been doing this work in this field for about 5.5 years now, actually. I got my first job at the Texoma Meet Electronic Stadium. And in my experience, my job has been to set up the staging, the seating, and the cameras, everything's like that for any and all events, from sporting all the way to music. It's hard, but it's honest work.
So let's discuss why you're here today. How did you get involved with the satire spectacle?
Well, in the first week of June, a company called Vision hired me to work as a construction worker for the spectacle. The man who hired me, his name was Vinny. Vinny from Vision. It's kind of catchy.
Now, what exactly did this job with the satire spectacle entail?
It was my normal job to be a contractor.
And when did you actually begin work on the event?
The construction crew was shipped out to the venue, Yarborough Island, on June 14th, and we began work that very day.
Now, Mr. Edwards, when they arrived, what were the first shipments of supplies like on Yarborough Island?
Well, when we got that first shipment on June 15th, the clothes, food, and water didn't seem to be able to satisfy the 5,000 people expected audience.
Now, Mr. Edwards, what were the overall construction conditions of the island like at that point?
Wooden scraps were everywhere, porta potties too. So many boxes and crates of equipment had just arrived and were laying everywhere on the island. I don't know if I've ever seen so much unfinished work on an event this huge just 2 weeks before it's supposed to start.
Your Honor, permission to approach Mr. Edwards with what has been previously marked as Exhibit 8?
You may.
I am now tendering Exhibit 8 to opposing counsel. Mr. Edwards, I am now approaching you with Exhibit 8. Do you recognize this document?
I do.
And what exactly is it?
Well, this document contains some pictures that I sent to a blog called the Texoma Alternative after I noticed the particularly disastrous island conditions.
Your Honor, the plaintiff now offers Exhibit 8 into evidence. Its authenticity has been stipulated.
Any objection?
No objection, Your Honor.
Exhibit 8 is admitted.
Now, Mr. Edwards, could you please describe the first picture in this exhibit?
Of course. This first picture contains a bunch of crates and unopened boxes of random items and porta potties scattered all over the island.
And what about the second picture?
The second picture contains another porta potty and a bunch of rickety old white tents in the background.
And finally, the third picture, Mr. Edwards?
This third picture contains a heaping pile of wooden scraps and some trash completely scattered all over the island, less than 2 weeks before the event is supposed to start.
Now, Mr. Edwards, when was the first time that you saw the defendant, Naylor Stirgram, on Yarborough Island?
The first time I saw Mr. Stirgram was June 18th, actually the very day that three pictures got released.
Now, Mr. Edwards, could you please point out the defendant, Naylor Stirgram, in today's courtroom?
He's right over there with the khaki pants.
Let the record reflect that Mr. Edwards has identified the defendant. Now, Mr. Edwards, what was the progress of the stage looking like at this point?
The stage was barely half built and made mostly of these wooden scraps right here that I myself had to piece together.
And what about the progress of the on-island guest housing?
Guest housing? The only accommodations that I was aware of for guests were these rickety old white tents in here that were in no way sufficient for 5,000 people.
Now, Mr. Edwards, what did you see Naylor Stirgram doing on the island that day, June 18th?
On that day, I saw Stirgram with that comedian Jackie Gleason touring the festival site, which included that same half-built stage and these same rickety tents. And after touring this area, he turned around and went to the top of the island to this mansion called the Compound.
Now, Mr. Edwards, did you ever see Naylor Stirgram on Yarborough Island again that day?
I did, about 2 hours later.
And what did you see him doing?
This time, it looked like he stormed out of the compound to the purview of the whole island. He seemed really frustrated to me, and he, with Jackie Gleason, took off on his helicopter immediately from the island.
Now, Mr. Edwards, to the best of your knowledge, was the satire spectacle canceled prior to its scheduled start date?
It was not.
Then what did you see happen?
Well, after I got home from working on the island, I still saw Naylor Stirgram chirping away about this event despite having been on that disastrous island. Just when I thought the event should have had its brake pumped, it looks like they were still going pedal to the metal.
Mr. Edwards, is Exhibit 1, page 4 in front of you?
Let me look through the pile. It is not.
Your Honor, permission to retrieve Exhibit 1 from the jury?
You may.
Permission to approach Mr. Edwards with Exhibit 1?
You may.
Now, Mr. Edwards, do you recognize this document?
I do.
And what exactly is it?
These are some of the chirps that Naylor Stirgram made after having been on that disastrous festival site and that disastrous island.
And which of these chirps in particular did you see after returning home from Yarborough Island?
The second one from the top on Exhibit 1-4 from June 25th.
Mr. Edwards, could you please read that chirp out loud to the jury?
Of course, it says this. 4 days away. This is like being a kid and waiting on Christmas. Let's get to the weekend already. I've seen the island and the setup, and this event is going to blow you away. What do you have to lose besides the greatest event of the century?
Thank you, Mr. Edwards. No further questions at this time, Your Honor. I now pass the witness.
Your Honor.
Sorry. Permission to publish Exhibit 8 to the jury?
You may.
Your Honor, may I proceed with cross?
Yes, you may.
Mr. Edwards, the satire spectacle obviously wasn't ready, was it?
You said it obviously was not ready?
It was not ready.
Of course not, and Stirgram saw that.
In fact, it was set up to be a disaster, wasn't it?
By this time that Stirgram was on the island, it was very much looking like a total disaster.
Now, you've mentioned just now and earlier with Ms. Gandor that you saw Naylor Stirgram on the island, correct?
Touring the festival site, including rickety tents and a half-built stage.
And you were concerned about the state of the island, weren't you?
I'd say so.
However, even though you had the opportunity, you chose not to talk to Mr. Stirgram.
Well, I was focusing on my work on the island, so I wouldn't say I had the opportunity.
But back to my question, even though you saw Mr. Stirgram on the island, you chose not to talk to him, correct?
Because I was contracted to work on the island.
Objection, Your Honor, non-responsive.
I'll sustain the objection.
So, Mr. Edwards, you chose not to talk to Mr. Stirgram, correct?
I would disagree.
Is it your testimony today that you did talk to Mr. Stirgram?
No, that's not my testimony.
So you never talked to Mr. Stirgram?
That's correct. I never talked to him.
Now, as you said earlier, you were hired to set up and tear down stages for the event, correct?
That's correct.
However, you weren't provided with half the supplies you needed.
I'm not sure the exact proportion, but I'd say there was not nearly enough supplies.
Right. For example, you didn't have a backdrop for the stage.
That's correct.
You didn't have steps to go up to the stage.
Not originally, but they eventually came.
In fact, you built those steps yourself, didn't you?
Some of it came from these wooden scraps from the exhibit that contains the Texoma alternative pictures.
Right. You didn't have video screens.
Eventually they came.
However, initially you didn't have them.
The second I got on the island, they weren't there.
Or the sound systems, correct?
They eventually came.
The technicians that were supposed to set up these things never showed up, did they?
No, instead I did it myself.
Right. The spectacle was supposed to hold about 4,000 to 5,000 people, correct?
5,000 people.
However, you were only provided with around 2,000 seats.
I think that's the correct number.
And the food and water that arrived when you were on the island were only enough for a few hundred.
That's correct, and Stirgram saw it.
Someone was supposed to provide everything that was necessary, correct?
I would assume so.
Ultimately, Chase Ford was supposed to provide everything that you needed to make the
Objection,
spectacle.
Your Honor. Speculation. Calls for speculation.
Response?
Your Honor, I am happy to lay the foundation that Mr. Edwards can answer this question.
All right, I'll overrule the objection at this time.
Yes, Your Honor.
Mr. Edwards, you were hired by a company called Vision, correct?
That's correct.
You know that Vision was Chase Ford's company, correct?
He was a CEO, but I'm not sure whose name was on the LLC.
So Chase Ford was the CEO, correct?
That's correct.
And as CEO, Chase Ford was ultimately responsible for everything on the
Objection,
island.
Your Honor. Calls for speculation.
Response?
Your Honor, the witness has testified that he knows what Chase Ford's role was as CEO, and I'm asking him, pursuant to that, whether Chase Ford was responsible for everything that Vision was responsible for.
May I respond, Your Honor?
You may.
Although opposing counsel has established that Mr. Edwards knows that Chase Ford was the CEO, this is still speculation because he would have no way of knowing what requirements and what things that Mr. Ford would be doing as CEO, as he is a construction worker.
I'll overrule the objection and allow the witness to answer the question if he can't answer the question.
May I re-ask my question?
You may.
So, Mr. Edwards, ultimately, Chase Ford was responsible through his company Vision for everything going on at the satire spectacle, correct?
I have no idea what Ford's responsibilities were as a CEO. I'm a construction worker or a contractor.
However, you do know that the things necessary for making the spectacle a success were never provided, correct?
Yes, but those fall under Vinny's domain, my crew supervisor.
No further questions. I pass the witness.
Brief redirect. Your Honor.
Redirect.
Mr. Edwards, why couldn't you speak with Naylor Stirgram at the time that he was on Yarborough Island?
I was busy constructing the disaster that Stirgram had witnessed.
Thank you, Mr. Edwards. No further questions at this time, Your Honor. I now pass the witness.
Recross.
No recross, Your Honor.
All right. Thank you. You may step down. Call your next witness.
The plaintiff now calls its third witness, Mr. Chase Ford, to the stand. And may I inquire as to how much time is remaining in the plaintiff's direct examination period?
8 minutes and 24 seconds.
Good evening, Mr. Ford. Please introduce yourself to the jury.
Hello, my name's Chase Ford. I'm 33 years old and I'm the founder and CEO of Vision Incorporated.
And what sort of business experience do you have?
Well, I first discovered my entrepreneurial proclivities in early grade school, bargaining off my help with other students' day-to-day homework responsibilities. Since then, I've graduated high school, attended a select business course at Texoma University, and started and ran a very successful party planning company.
And what sort of business experience do you have?
Well, as I was saying, I've run many businesses and I'm involved in different aspects of running the businesses themselves.
How did you get involved with the satire spectacle?
Well, I was the one that had the vision for the spectacle itself. I was at a swanky comedy club when I heard someone make jokes about the ocean. I was then inspired to make a comedy event combining my two favorite things, parties and the beach. Original, right?
And Mr. Ford, what were your first steps in getting this original idea running?
Well, I initially contacted my usual investors to make up the company, which we were calling Vision. After that, we picked a date, hired a staff, and booked a beautiful island located 33 degrees northeast of Texoma, Yarborough Island.
And what did you do about the food for the event?
Well, I contacted the CEO of First Class Entertainment, Sean Wallace, about preparing an estimate for food and merchandise for the event.
And what happened next?
Well, As Vision didn't have much in terms of a budget initially, Wallace and I both agreed that bringing on a popular internet celebrity such as Naylor Stagram would be sufficient to ensure the legitimacy of the event. So after much research and consideration, I reached out to Naylor Stagram.
And how did your conversations with the defendant, Naylor Stagram, go?
Well, after I presented them with some promotional materials that I myself created, things went very, very well. Not only did he agree to promote the event, but he even got one of his close friends, world-renowned comedian Jackie Gleason, agree to be humiliated on stage as an event.
And was there any sort of contract drafted between the two of you?
Yes, of course.
Your Honor, the plaintiff now offers Exhibit 10. Your Honor, permission to approach the witness with what has been marked as Exhibit 10.
You may.
I'm now tendering a copy of Exhibit 10 to opposing counsel. I'm now showing you a copy of Exhibit 10. Do you recognize this document?
Yes, I do.
And what is it?
Well, it's the agreement between Naylor Stagram and my company Vision.
And was this conducted in a regular course of business activity?
Yes, of course.
And did the creator of this document have knowledge of the document when they were signing it?
Definitely.
Your Honor, the plaintiff now offers Exhibit 10 into evidence. Its authenticity has been stipulated.
Any objection?
No objection, Your Honor.
Exhibit 10 is admitted.
Permission to publish a copy to the jury?
You may.
Now, Mr. Ford, what was Ms. Stagram guaranteed to gain according to this contract?
Well, as seen here under the Vision's responsibilities portion, Stagram would receive a lump sum $100,000 down payment just for coming on and agreeing to promote the event.
But what else could Mr. Stagram benefit from?
Well, Stagram would also receive 10% commission on all the ticket sales that were purchased using the link in his Chirpster account. However, this payment wasn't guaranteed.
And what do you mean by not guaranteed?
Well, he would only receive this commission if the event wasn't canceled. If it was canceled, he would only receive the smaller $100,000 down payment.
So after the contract was signed, how did Ms. Wallace proceed with the food order?
Well, Wallace immediately began preparing the order for food and merchandise of the event, as far as I know.
And how did you proceed after the signing of Stagram's contract?
I began setting up on the island. I spruced up the on-island headquarters, which we called the compound, and I even hired various managers for different aspects of the event.
And how did Mr. Stagram continue on?
Well, being the business partner that we were and what we had agreed to, Stagram began promoting the event.
Now let's look at the development of the satire spectacle. What was the island of what was Yarborough Island looking like in the first few stages of the process of development?
Initially, things were looking great, but then the company made a few miscalculations and admittedly a couple questionable spending decisions.
So looking to approximately a week and a half prior to the spectacle start date, what was the island looking like at that time?
Things weren't looking great. I began to have serious concerns on whether or not the event could be pulled off.
And so how did your company respond?
Well, after talking to various employees and managers, we decided it would be best to cancel the event.
And did you cancel the event?
No, we didn't do that initially because we wanted to involve Stagram in the process since he had been such an integral role in promoting the event and had such a significant sum of money at stake.
And how did you do this?
I invited Stagram to Yarborough Island on June 18th.
And what were your hopes for Stagram whilst on the island?
I was hoping that a brief glimpse of the position we were at would convince him that our vision was not yet ready for the world to see.
And where did you speak with Mr. Naylor Stagram?
Well, when Stagram arrived upon the island, I spoke to him about the next parts of what we needed to do for the event.
And what portions of the island could you see from this compound that you spoke with him in?
There was actually a lot of trees, but you could definitely still see quite a bit of what was on the island at the time.
And what did you tell Naylor Stagram?
I told him that I was seriously concerned about the event failing due to various delays we had encountered, and I thought we should cancel.
And how did Mr. Stagram respond?
He screamed at me about losing his commission and refused to listen to anything else I had to say. He threatened me and told me he would ruin any chance I had at creating a future business if I canceled the event.
And did you take these threats seriously?
Yes, I did, because I thought that many of my employees that I regularly contracted would lose their livelihoods and job security.
So, keeping this in mind, what did this change about the event?
Well, I had to expedite everything along schedule, and I had to order significantly larger quantities of cheaper food to make sure we could squeeze by with enough necessities on the island.
And what were the effects of these last-minute changes?
Well, I had to order much more cheaper food and drink, and because of this, there ended up with an insufficient quantity of water on the island.
Now, looking to the Satire Spectacles start date, what was the island looking like at this time?
Things were looking okay. As guests began to arrive, I thought that things might be able to work out.
But did they?
No, unfortunately they did not.
And why did they not?
Well, because Stirgram threatened me and forced me to expedite the order that I had with my supplier, it significantly changed the content of the order, and there ended up being an insufficient quantity of water on the island.
And so what did you have to do?
As soon as it became apparent that any of our customers would be in danger, I had no choice but to cancel the event.
And lastly, Mr. Ford, why are you here today?
Well, when I heard what happened to Carlin George, I was devastated. I was horrified. And Naylor Stirgram might have taken away my choice to cancel the event, but he won't take away my choice to testify to the truth here today.
Thank you, Mr. Ford. No further questions at this time, Your Honor. I now pass the witness.
Cross-examination.
Yes, Your Honor. May I proceed?
You may.
Now, I'd like to begin by addressing something that you told Mr. Truck. Now, you claimed that it wasn't you who changed the food order, correct?
No, I was forced to change the food order because of Stagram, but ultimately I was the one that technically made the change, but not because I wanted to.
You claimed that Miss Wallace reached out to you and told you that you had to cancel it, and it had nothing to do with Mr. Stirgram.
Miss Wallace reached out to me? No, Miss Wallace didn't reach out to me telling me that I had to change my order.
It's your testimony today that you changed your order of your own accord, and aside from anything that Miss Wallace said?
Well, of course I communicated with Miss Wallace, so we both agreed how to change the order itself.
But to be clear, it's your testimony today that you reached out to Miss Wallace.
Yes, we were in close communication with each other.
Now, do you remember making a statement in this case?
Of course.
Your Honor, permission to approach the witness with what has been previously marked as their statement?
You may.
For the benefit of opposing counsel, I will be reading from page 6, lines 14 through 20.
And what will you be using this for?
For the purposes of impeachment. Now, this is your fact statement, correct?
It seems to be.
And this is your signature?
It is.
And you were told that you could change this at any point up to this morning, correct?
Which I did.
And this is your addendum, correct?
Yes, it seems to be.
And all of this was written under oath, the same oath you're under today, correct?
Of course.
Now, would you please read along silently with me as I read? I read Sean Wallace's statement. I did speak to Sean on the phone about the food order on June 19, but it was Sean who called me. And Sean said there were problems getting the gourmet food we had previously ordered. Sean said the only option at that point was getting cheaper food that could be obtained on short notice. I approved the change reluctantly, but only because Instagram had forced me into the position of cutting costs. Did I read that correctly?
Yeah, I thought you were talking about when initially he approached me with the approach for food and merchandise, which that's when I approached him.
So to be clear, Miss Wallace reached out to you and told you that you had to change to gourmet food, correct?
Yes, in that case, but I didn't think we were referring to that moment.
Now, it wasn't until about 2 weeks before the event that you began to grow concerned, correct?
Yes, you could say that.
And as you told Mr. Truck, you invited Mr. Stirgram to look around the island, correct?
Yes, to see the lackluster progress on the island, to convince him that we should cancel.
You didn't walk around the island with him, though.
That was my intention, and he walked up to the island from the helicopter, which was a pretty long hike all throughout the campsite.
Back to my question, you didn't walk around the island with him.
No, he had to leave, unfortunately.
So you don't know what parts of the island he saw?
No, I'm not Mr. Stirgram, so I don't know exactly what he saw, but I am sure that he walked from the compound to the helicopter.
And you claim that you told him it was necessary to cancel the festival, correct?
Yes, and then he proceeded to threaten me in my own place of business.
That's right, you claim he outright refused, don't you?
Yes.
And you believed the festival was destined to fail, didn't you?
Yes, we had encountered too many delays, and that's why I wanted to cancel.
So of course, after this conversation, you took down the website to buy tickets, right?
No, we were still in the process of canceling the event. It still wasn't 100% sure that we were canceling the event. That's why I talked to Naylor Stirgram first.
So even after this conversation, you allowed people to continue buying tickets to an event you believed would fail, didn't you?
Yes, because I had to protect my company from what I thought Stirgram was capable of. He threatened me to continue on with the event.
Objection, Your Honor, non-responsive.
Overrule.
Now, this website was designed by you and your company, correct?
Yes, it was designed by my company to sell tickets.
And on this website, there were pictures of the villas guests could expect, weren't there?
Yes, of course. We like to inform our consumers.
And there were specifics about the gourmet food they could expect, wasn't there?
Yes, which Naylor Stirgram also promoted on his Tripster account.
And there were lots of specific expectations for the guests, weren't there?
Yes, and when I saw that we couldn't fulfill these, I wanted to cancel.
And it was this website that you provided a link for to Mr. Stirgram, correct?
Yes, so that customers could buy tickets through him.
And it was this link that he shared in his posts.
It was.
But Mr. Stirgram himself never included any specifics about what guests could expect, did he?
I'm pretty sure he talked about the different things that he was looking forward to at the event, so I don't know that I would agree with that.
He never said any specific statements aside from great food and great accommodations, correct?
That seems pretty specific to me.
Now, it wasn't Mr. Stirgram's responsibility to oversee the construction of housing, was it?
No, it wasn't, but it was his responsibility to tell the truth to his followers.
It was not Mr. Stirgram's responsibility to oversee the purchase of food or water.
No, it wasn't. He was a business partner for advertising.
It wasn't Mr. Stirgram's responsibility to be sure that the island was prepared for guests.
That's true, and that's why I communicated what the content of these things were to him.
And it wasn't Mr. Stirgram's responsibility to cancel the festival if necessary, was it?
No, technically it wasn't, but his opinion was still very valid and one that we took very closely.
But to be very clear to the jury, you did not need Mr. Stirgram's approval to cancel the festival, did you?
No, because canceling the festival involved many more people than just myself.
So just to be clear, that's a yes. You could have canceled the festival, correct?
Technically, I could have, yes.
So contrary to what Mr. Truk said at the beginning of this trial, you did have a choice, didn't you?
I didn't have a choice, no. I was being threatened.
As you testified just 1 moment ago, you could have canceled the festival, correct?
Objection to asked and answered, Your Honor.
Overrule.
As you just testified, you could have canceled the festival, correct?
I could have canceled the festival,
Thank you.
technically.
Now, it was your responsibility to oversee the construction of housing, wasn't it?
I allocated different managers for that.
But as the CEO of Vision and the creator of the festival, it was your responsibility, wasn't it?
Not every aspect was my responsibility. That'd be an awful lot of work for just one person.
As the creator of the festival, it was your responsibility to give the guests everything you'd promised, correct?
To facilitate that to happen, yes. And when I saw I couldn't do that, I wanted to cancel.
By the day of the event, there weren't nearly enough tents, were there?
Unfortunately, there wasn't, and that's one of the reasons why I wanted to cancel.
Objection, Your Honor, non-responsive. The witness has gone outside of the scope of my question.
I'll sustain the objection.
Moves to strike everything yes, after yes.
So stricken.
There also weren't any of the villas that your guests had paid extra money for, were there?
No, there wasn't.
It was your responsibility to oversee the purchase of food and water, wasn't it?
Yes, it was.
But by the day of the event, there wasn't nearly enough water for your guests, was there?
No, I did my best to do what we could.
And it was because of this lack of water that Carlin George was forced to drink from a puddle. Isn't that right?
Objection to speculation.
Response?
Your Honor, one of the primary issues in today's case, and in fact in the stipulations, is the fact that Carlin George did drink from a puddle and did suffer from a waterborne illness, and the lack of water is clearly the cause of that.
Response, Your Honor.
You may.
While it is true that this is an important matter in today's case, it isn't true that Mr. Chase Ford would have any personal knowledge on the actions of Carlin George because he was not with Carlin George when she approached the puddle water to drink.
I'll sustain the objection.
So just to be clear, there wasn't enough water on the day of the event, was there?
Objection, Your Honor, to asked and answered.
Overrule.
There wasn't enough water, was there?
Unfortunately, there wasn't because of Naylor Stagram.
Naylor Stirgram was not in charge of making sure there was enough water, was there? Was she?
Objection, Your Honor. Again, asked and answered previous in the cross-examination.
Overrule.
Mr. Stirgram was not responsible for providing enough water, was he?
No, he
Thank you.
wasn't.
It was your responsibility to cancel the event if it became necessary, wasn't it?
It was my responsibility to talk to my employees to make that decision.
It was your responsibility to cancel the festival if necessary, wasn't it?
Once I talked to everybody in my team and made sure they were on board, yes.
But it was fully within your rights to cancel it, wasn't it?
Yes, but I wouldn't
And
agree
you
with...
didn't, did you?
No, I couldn't.
No further questions.
Redirect.
Yes, Your Honor. And may I inquire as to how much time is remaining?
26 seconds.
Now, Mr. Ford, how did Naylor Stagram influence your choice to cancel the event?
Well, Naylor Stagram threatened me and my company, putting many of my employees at risk to losing their jobs.
And why was there not enough water on the island?
Well, because Naylor Stagram forced me to dramatically alter the order I had with my supplier.
Lastly, what did you think about the expected success of the festival after Stagram wouldn't allow you to cancel?
I didn't think things would work out.
No further questions. I now pass the witness.
Recross.
May I inquire as to how much time I have remaining?
36 seconds.
One question, Your Honor. Just to be clear to the jury, you never changed the amount of water in your order, did you?
Objection, Your Honor, to out of the scope of the redirect.
May I respond?
You may.
In the redirect, Mr. Truck got into the fact that it was because of Mr. Stirgram, allegedly, that there was not enough water on the island because he was forced to change the order. I believe this is false, and that while he did change the food order, he never changed the amount of water in that order, and therefore cannot blame Mr. Stirgram for the lack of water.
Response, Your Honor.
You may.
The question was directed to ask about Sean Wallace's responsibilities in the bringing of water to the island, and this was not actually referenced during the redirect.
Overrule.
You never changed the amount of water in your order, did you?
No, but it was the change
Thank
in
you.
the other food.
No further
that's-
questions.
Right. You may step down.
The plaintiff now rests.
And can I ask a quick question? Are y'all hot? Yes. Okay. Any objection to me propping the door up? Hopefully that'll get the hair photo.
Thank you.
Sorry, Your Honor.
All right. Defense, call your first witness.
Yes, Your Honor. The defense calls Naylor Stirgram to the stand. Your Honor, may I proceed?
You may.
Good evening, Mr. Stirgram. I'm going to ask you a few questions today about your involvement in the satire spectacle. Would you please introduce yourself to the jury?
Hi, my name is Naylor Stagram, but you probably know me as Instagram from my super famous Chirpster account.
What do you do for a living, Mr. Stagram?
Well, as you can probably tell, I've dabbled in acting and modeling, but my true passion is being a social media influencer.
Could you tell the jury what is a social media influencer?
Essentially, I'm super famous on Chirpster, and I use that fame to influence people to buy things or do things that I'm doing.
Could you tell us a little bit about the social media platform that you use?
Sure. Chirpster is sort of an off-brand Twitter where I can contact my followers and tell them what I'm doing.
How were you involved in the satire spectacle?
Chase Ford and his company Vision hired me to promote the festival and sell tickets.
What was the hiring process like?
Chase Ford approached me several times, and eventually I accepted his offer when he showed me some promotional materials for the event.
Would you recognize a copy of these materials?
Of course.
Your Honor, may I approach the witness with what has been previously marked as Exhibit 9?
You may.
Let the record reflect I'm showing a copy of this exhibit to opposing counsel, Mr. Shookfay. Mr. Stirgram, do you recognize this?
Yes, these are the promotional materials that I was talking about earlier.
Are they a fair and accurate representation of those materials?
Yes, they are.
At this time, I move to admit Exhibit 9 into evidence.
No objections, Your Honor.
Exhibit 9, which is a 2-page document, is admitted.
Mr. Stirgram, what information did these promotional materials give you about the festival that you were promoting?
Well, it talked about when it would be, the location, it shows a picture of a beautiful beach, and it just says how it would be a great comedy festival.
What did Chase Ford tell you about the event you were promoting?
Chase told me that this was going to be an amazing event, high class, super exclusive, it seemed like the party of the century.
Did you develop a contract with Chase Ford?
Yes, I did.
According to the contract that you developed, what was your job?
Well, I was just supposed to sell tickets and promote the event.
And according to the contract, how often were you supposed to post about the festival?
Well, initially I was supposed to post 4 times a week, but as it got closer to the event, I had to ramp it up to 6 times.
Were there any limitations to what you could say in your posts?
Yes, I had to say good things about the event. I couldn't say bad things about the event that I was promoting.
Did you ever post a picture of the accommodations that were supposed to be at the island?
No, I never did, but in my posts I included a link to Chase Ford's website where he had all the pictures and specifics for the event.
Did you ever post a picture of the food that was supposed to be on the island?
No, I didn't, but like I said earlier, all of that was on Chase Ford's website.
What were you paid for your work?
For my involvement, I got a $100,000 guarantee, and in addition to that, I got a 10% commission off of all the tickets that I sold.
So, were you able to get people excited about the festival?
Yes, people were super excited. It's a comedy festival on a beach. Who wouldn't be excited?
So, were you excited?
I was so excited. Chase Ford told me that this was going to be the party of the century.
Did you ever visit the site of the festival before the festival occurred?
Yes, I did. Me and my friend Jackie Gleason, we visited the island about 2 weeks before it was said to go.
What did you think about it?
It was still in construction 2 weeks out, but I looked around and I thought progress looked like it was on schedule.
So, were you at all concerned?
No, Chase assured me that nothing was wrong with
Objection,
this
Your
event.
Honor, to hearsay.
Response?
Yes, Your Honor. This statement that Chase said is not being offered for the truth of the matter, but for the effect on the listener. The statement that Mr. Stirgram was about to say was that Chase assured him that everything was on schedule. In reality, it wasn't. However, it's an effect on the listener because Mr. Stirgram didn't know that. As a result, he believed that everything would be great, and he continued to post about the festival.
May I respond, Your Honor?
You may.
Opposing counsel very much is trying to establish what Mr. Ford is testifying to as a fact here in court and for the truth of the matter, as they're trying to establish that the island was actually in great condition and that it was ahead of schedule when Mr. Stirgram himself visited, and therefore that he had no knowledge of any problems and that he can't be liable for fraud. So they very much are trying to enter this for the truth of the matter asserted.
Your Honor, may I respond?
Overruled.
So, Mr. Stirgram, were you at all concerned?
Like I said, I had zero concerns. Chase Ford assured me that everything was right on schedule and right like it should have been.
Were you able to attend the satire spectacle?
Unfortunately, I was not. One of my close friends got checked into rehab right before the festival, and I had to go be with them.
Objection, Your Honor. This is speculation. At no point has opposing counsel laid the foundation of how Mr. Ford found out that his friend was in rehab, and so he actually has no knowledge of this at the time.
Response?
Your Honor, Mr. Stirgram is testifying just based on the knowledge that he has that he knew that his friend was in rehab, and as a result, he went to visit him.
May I respond, Your Honor?
You may.
This statement is actually now predicated on hearsay, as Mr. Stirgram, actually found out that his friend was in rehab, supposedly, because of a text that he claimed to have gotten. They actually haven't laid the foundation of this text at all, so without doing so, Mr. Stirgram can't testify to this fact.
Overrule.
So, Mr. Stirgram, were you able to attend the festival?
No, like I said, I had to go be with my friend who was in rehab.
And since you weren't able to attend, when did you end up hearing about how the event occurred?
Well, I was in touch with some of my friends on the island, so I heard about all the craziness that went down pretty soon after it happened.
You've heard testimony today in court from Miss Carlin George. Do you know her?
No, I do not know Carlin, but I think she's one of my followers.
Did you ever talk to Chase Ford about any of the complications about the festival?
No, I didn't, and he never approached me with anything, which really surprised me considering how this event was not prepared.
Did Chase Ford ever ask you about the food and water on the island?
No, he didn't, which, like I said, really surprised me.
And did you ever talk to Chase Ford about canceling the festival?
No, I never talked to him about that.
Let's talk a little bit more about your specific job for the event. Were you at all responsible for budgeting for the event?
No, I wasn't. That was all Chase Ford's job.
Objection, Your Honor, to speculation.
Response.
I'm asking Mr. Stirgram what his specific responsibilities were, and since he was the one working for Chase Ford, he can testify to his own job.
May I respond, Your Honor?
You may.
I'm not objecting to the portion of Mr. Stirgram's testimony where he said his part of the job. I'm merely objecting to the part where he testified about what Chase Ford was responsible for, and they haven't laid the foundation of what he was responsible for.
Overrule. I'll allow the witness to answer the question if he knows.
So, Mr. Stirgram, were you at all responsible for budgeting for the festival?
No, I wasn't at all. Like I said, that was all Chase Ford's job.
How about construction?
No, once again, that's Chase Ford's job.
Were you responsible for making sure the accommodations were adequate?
Chase Ford's job.
Were you responsible for making sure there was enough food and water on the island?
No, Vision, Chase Ford's company, was in charge of all that.
Did you believe what you told your followers?
Of course I did. Chase Ford assured me that this event was going to crush expectations.
And did you ever intentionally mislead your followers?
No, of course not. I thought that everything I told them was the truth.
No further questions, Your Honor. I pass the witness.
Cross-examination.
Yes, Your Honor. May it please the court? Mr. Stirgram, the plaintiff, during their opening statement, stated that you were just an advertiser. But you were actually very much more than an advertiser, aren't you?
No, I feel like I'm an advertiser, but I feel like I connect with my fans on more personal level.
So it's your testimony to the court that your job is to be an advertiser?
Yes, my job is to be an advertiser.
Mr. Stirgram, you recall creating a fact statement in preparation for today's trial, don't you?
Yes, of course.
And you signed this fact statement, correct?
Yeah, I did.
And this morning when you came, you actually had the chance to create an addendum, didn't you?
I did.
And you signed this addendum, right?
Yes.
And you were told to include all relevant information in both of these documents.
Yes, I was.
And you were under oath for both of those documents' creation, correct?
Of course.
Your Honor, permission to approach Mr. Stirgram with a copy of his fact statement and addendum?
You may.
I'm now tendering a copy of Mr. Stirgram's fact statement and addendum to opposing counsel. I will be referencing page 1, line 8. And permission to approach Mr. Stirgram.
You may.
I'm now approaching you with your fact statement, Mr. Stirgram.
Yes.
You recognize this document, don't you?
Of course.
And this is your fact statement?
Yes, it is.
And this is your signature right here.
Yes.
Please follow along as I read from page 1, lines 8 of your fact statement.
Objection, Your Honor, as to improper impeachment. The lines that opposing counsel, Mr. Stirgram, is about to read are not a direct contradiction to what Mr. Stirgram has already testified.
May I respond, Your Honor?
Overrule.
Please follow along, Mr. Stirgram. In case you were born way back in the 80s or something, an influencer is someone who has tons of followers on social media and can influence them to buy stuff by just posting about it. It's so much more than an advertiser. It's a personal connection to people that I've never met who see me wearing a shirt or flying to a secluded island and saying, I want to do that too. Those are your words, aren't they?
Yes, and isn't that what I testified to?
Now, Mr. Ford, let's talk a bit about how you got on board with the satire spectacle. Now, excuse me, Mr. Stirgram. Now, Chase Ford reached out to you to get on board, correct?
Yeah, he's the one who hired me to promote the festival.
And when he did so, he approached you with those promotional materials in front of you?
Yes, he did.
We'll refer back to those in a couple of minutes. But for now, let's talk about your visit to Yarborough Island prior to the event's beginning. Now, you arrived on Yarborough Island around June 18th, correct?
Yeah, me and Jackie Gleason came to check out the island.
And when you got to the island, you noticed that it was in full-on construction mode, didn't you?
Yeah, it was.
You saw scaffolding everywhere, right?
Yes.
Now, on the bottom of the second page of the promotional materials in front of you, there's a picture of a house, isn't there?
I think it's a house, yeah.
But when you were on the island, you actually saw no houses, did you?
I didn't really look around a lot, but I didn't see any of these, no.
Well, you actually did fly in on the island from a helicopter, didn't you?
Yes, I did.
And you still saw no houses, right?
I didn't see any of these.
Which means that you saw none of the houses that are being promoted on those promotional materials on the island at all, correct?
No, but I definitely could have missed them.
But you did hike up to the compound as well, correct?
Yes, I did.
And the compound was on at top of a large hill, right?
Yes.
Now, Mr. Ford, at this point, there were only 10 days, give or take, before the beginning of the event, correct?
It was something like that.
Yet you still continued to promote the satire spectacle after this point, didn't you?
Of course I did. I would have violated my contract if I'd stopped.
And in fact, you proceeded to promote it as the greatest event of the century, didn't you?
Yeah, and I was sure it was going to be.
Mr. Stirgram, let's talk about what you had to lose if the satire spectacle was canceled. Now, prior to agreeing to promote the event, you agreed to a contract, right?
Yes, we worked out a contract with Chase Ford.
And that contract is Exhibit 10. Is it in front of you, Mr.?
Yes, it is.
Okay. Now, Mr. Stirgram, according to this contract, you were entitled to a 10% commission of all the tickets that you sold if the event weren't canceled, correct?
That's right.
You're aware that you sold at least 2,500 tickets from your specific link on Chirpster, aren't you?
I'm not sure, but something like that.
So you did sell at least around 2,500 tickets on Chirpster?
I believe that's the right number.
And you're aware that each ticket at its cheapest level was $500, right?
That's true.
So this would mean that you sold at least $1,250,000 worth of tickets from your specific link on Chirpster, correct?
I'm really not sure of that math.
Your Honor, the plaintiff requests that the court take judicial notice of the adjudicative fact and mathematical certainty that 2,500 multiplied by 500 is 1,250,000 pursuant to Rule 201.
Do you have any objection?
No objection, Your Honor.
All right. The court takes judicial notice of that fact.
And Your Honor, pursuant to Rule 201, may the jury be instructed to accept that mathematical certainty as conclusive?
Since this is a civil case, the jury is so instructed.
Now, Mr. Stagram, this would mean that you are actually entitled to $125,000 if the event weren't canceled, according to this contract, right?
Yeah, by that math.
Now, you heard Chase Ford testify earlier, didn't you?
Yes, I did.
So you heard him testify that he pleaded with you that the satire spectacle be canceled.
Yes, but he never did.
But just to be clear, if the satire spectacle were canceled, according to this contract, you would never get your $125,000 minimum commission, would you?
True, but in my business, it's not really...
Objection, Your Honor. Move to strike everything after the witness's answer true as non-responsive.
I'll overrule the objection.
Now,
The witness may answer.
Will you re-ask your question?
So, according to this contract, if the event were canceled, you wouldn't get your $125,000 minimum commission?
Well, that is true. In my business, it's more about the recognition I have with my fans than the money.
Well, you still, even months later, still very much want this money, don't you?
Of course.
Now, Mr. Stirgram, let's talk a bit about how you promoted the satire spectacle to your audience. Now, you're aware of the Texoma Alternative article that criticized the event, correct?
Yes, I've heard about that conspiracy blogger.
And that article attempted to steer people away from the event?
Yes, it did.
Now, you actually blocked the author of this article on your Chirpster account, didn't you?
I had to, or else it would have been a violation of my contract because I said I couldn't have any negative things about the festival on my feed.
So that's a yes to my question. You blocked the author on Chirpster?
Of course I blocked him.
And you blocked him so that his post regarding the satire spectacle would not show up for your followers to see, right?
Yes, so I wouldn't violate my contract.
You're now aware that Carlin George was a follower of yours on Chirpster, aren't you?
Yes, I know that now.
But you have criticized Carlin George for not reading this article, haven't you?
I don't know if I'd call it criticizing, but if she had read it, she would have gotten another opinion on the festival.
Well, you do certainly think she should have read the article, don't you?
If she wanted another opinion, yes.
So, just to be clear, you think Carlin George should have read an article that you yourself blocked from your Chirpster account?
Well, she could have read it not on my Chirpster account.
Objection, Your Honor. The witness has become non-responsive.
Sustain.
Mr. Ford, Mr. Stirgram, I'll ask you the question again. You believe that Carlin George should have read an article that you yourself blocked from your Chirpster account, don't you?
Yes, that's true.
Now, Mr. Stirgram, Exhibit 1, page 3 is in front of you. Is it or is it not?
Yes, there's Exhibit 1.
Can you please follow along? May I approach the witness, Your Honor?
You may.
Please follow along as I read the third chirp from the top of Exhibit 1, page 3. Don't believe the naysayers. They're just jelly. You need to be at #SatireSpectacle. You posted that, didn't you?
Yes, I did.
And you actually posted this chirp 2 days after that critical Texoma alternative article came out?
Yes, that's true.
Now, nowhere in your contract were you required to denounce naysayers of the Satire Spectacle, correct?
No, it's just part of my promotion.
And in fact, nowhere in that specific chirp do you mention anything about it being a paid advertisement?
No, I must have forgotten. I mean, I chirped so many times.
Yet you still do have your specific link from which fans could purchase tickets, correct?
Yes, so they can find specific information on the festival.
Okay. Now, Mr. Stirgram, finally, let's talk about who is at fault for Carlin George's injuries. Now, part of your job as promoter of the Satire Spectacle was to increase awareness of the event, correct?
Yeah, and sell tickets.
And you're aware that Carlin George looked to you for information regarding the event, correct?
Yes, I now know that.
Now, Mr. Stagram, you actually promised your fans multiple times that you would be on Yarborough Island for the Satire Spectacle, didn't you?
I did.
But you never actually showed up to Yarborough Island for the actual event, did you?
No, I mean, my friend got checked into rehab and I had to go be with him.
In fact, after your visit to Yarborough Island on June 18th, you never visited the island, ever again, did you?
No, I didn't feel there was a reason to.
Well, you are aware that Mrs. George, your follower, did show up to Yarborough Island, aren't you?
Yes.
And you're aware that she suffered an injury shortly after.
Yes, I am.
Thank you, Mr. Stagram. No further questions at this time, Your Honor. I now pass the witness.
Redirect.
Briefly, Your Honor. Could you explain a little bit more about the job of being an influencer?
Sure. So basically, I'm supposed to increase awareness of the product, in this case the festival, and help people buy into it.
And even though you were being paid for your work, did you care that the event went well?
Of course I did. See, if I promote an event that goes poorly, that really hurts my credibility, and I'll lose followers, which means I lose money.
No further questions, Your Honor.
Recross.
No recross, Your Honor.
All right. Witness may step down. Call your next witness.
Your Honor, the defense calls Sean Wallace to the stand. Good afternoon, Ms. Wallace. I'm going to ask you a few questions today about the services you provided for the Satire Spectacle. Would you please introduce yourself to the jury?
Of course. My name is Sean Wallace. I live in Pawnee, Texoma with my family, and I run First Class Entertainment out of Eagleton, Texoma.
What is First Class Entertainment?
Well, we're a family business. My dad actually built it from the ground up and passed it on to me a little while back. Not my brother, Walter. He passed it on to me, but we supply high-quality food and apparel for big events around the Texoma area.
How did you first hear about the Satire Spectacle?
Chase Ford contacted me February of 2018 and just pitched his idea to me. It sounded really cool, and he asked me to write up an estimate for him.
Did you agree to write one up for him?
I did. It took me about a week to gather everything I needed to write up an estimate and get it to him.
Did Mr. Ford want to make any changes?
Yes, so he actually
Objection,
contacted...
Your Honor. This answer is going to require hearsay.
Response.
Your Honor, may I approach? Constructively.
Yes.
The witness is about to testify to the changes Mr. Ford requested, and that is not being offered for the truth of the matter asserted, but merely the effect on the listener in that she did make those changes.
Response, Your Honor. The fact that they are actually giving this information to say that the order was changed is very much indicative of the fact that they are using this for the truth of the matter, and they do believe that this is true.
Overrule.
Did Mr. Ford request any changes?
He did. He requested much more apparel than we had originally discussed, and I also had a couple of concerns about the estimate he asked for.
What were you concerned about?
Well, after he asked me for that extra apparel, I told him that I was skeptical that he would be able to
Objection to hearsay yet again.
Response.
Your Honor, this is not being offered for the truth of the matter asserted, but the effect on the listener.
Response, Your Honor.
You may.
Again, this is being used for the truth of the matter, as the declarant in this case, Miss Shawn Wallace, is going to show that she told Mr. Ford something that should also have affected him. Therefore, not only are they looking at the effect, but also the actual truth of the matter asserted in the statement.
Overrule.
What were you concerned about?
I was, first of all, concerned that I didn't think that he would be able to sell this much apparel at an event the size that he wanted. But he insisted on it, so I added it to the estimate. Second of all, he didn't ask for any water in the estimate, so that also raised a red flag for me because I knew he had some experience in the business. So I told him about the water and we added it to the estimate.
After making those changes, what happened next?
Well, after I made those changes, I sent the document or the estimate back to Chase and requested a standard 40% down payment.
How did Mr. Ford respond?
Well, he didn't get back to me until about a week and a half later, but he complained about the down payment. He said that it was just too expensive, that he wouldn't be able to pay it, and he threatened to take his business elsewhere.
Were you able to offer any solutions?
I was. Fortunately, before my dad passed the business on to me, he taught me a little trick. For clients who are not in a position to pay the down payment, we can waive it if we guarantee the event goes well by having some sort of celebrity on board. So I told Chase that.
Was Mr. Ford able to get a celebrity on board?
Yes, though he didn't contact me until April. He now had a name and a date for the event, and he had 2 celebrities on board. So I was really thrilled to move forward.
At that point, were you able to finalize an agreement?
Yes. I think it was April 16th that I got his signature back on the contract that I had written up.
Would you recognize a copy of this contract if I were to show it to you?
Absolutely.
Permission to approach the witness with what has been previously marked as Exhibit 11?
You may.
Let the record reflect I am showing a copy to opposing counsel, Mr. Trook. Do you recognize that?
Yes, this is a copy of the estimate and contract between myself and Chase.
Is that a fair and accurate copy of that contract?
Yes, it is.
I move to admit Exhibit 11 into evidence.
Any objection?
Yes, Your Honor, to the prejudicial value of this document outweighs the probative.
Response?
Your Honor, I don't believe there is anything in this document that could be considered prejudicial. As to the probative value, this shows the amount of water that was ordered and the amount of food that was ordered. And one of the primary issues in today's case is that Carlin George did not have access to water.
Your objection's overruled.
In that case, Your Honor, I would also like to object to hearsay.
Response?
Your Honor, I can ask a few more questions to lay the grounds that this is a regularly conducted business activity.
All right. I'll overrule your objection at this time. Allow her to lay a foundation.
Yes, Your Honor.
Ms. Wallace, do you often make contracts in your line of work?
Definitely, all the time.
Was this contract made by someone with knowledge about this business?
Yes, I wrote up the contract.
Was it made at or near the time of the orders?
Yes, it was.
Was it made in the course of regularly conducted business activity?
It was.
And is there anything about this document to indicate a lack of trustworthiness?
No.
I move to admit Exhibit 11.
Any objection?
No objections at this time, Your Honor.
All right. Exhibit 11 is admitted.
Now, after you were able to finalize this agreement, what did you do next?
Well, I immediately started contacting my suppliers and putting in the orders for the all of the food and merchandise that Chase wanted. So I ordered the food to arrive just a couple of days before the event to guarantee that it was fresh for the patrons. And I ordered all of the other items, t-shirts, specialty items, to arrive as quickly as possible over the next 4 to 6 weeks.
At this time, did you have any concerns about the satire spectacle?
Based on my communications with Chase, no. However, I did start hearing rumors about a blog post circulating among the employees in my warehouse, and I was getting really concerned because it was putting out some bad publicity for the event that I was supplying food for.
Did you read this blog post?
I did, several times.
And were you concerned by it?
Absolutely, because of the contents and talking about how the satire spectacle was not prepared.
Did you do anything about your concerns?
Of course, I contacted Chase. I think I called him the next day, and at first I didn't mention my concern. I just told him everything is on track from our end of the deal, and he told me the same thing, that everything was on track from their end.
What happened next?
Well, at this point, I mentioned my concern in the preparedness of the event, and it was only after I mentioned that concern that Chase told me that everything was ahead of schedule.
Did that seem to be true?
Looking back, with hindsight, I know that I had a lot of reasons to be concerned about trusting Chase, but I didn't know that at the time, so I took his word for it and I went about my business.
Did things continue smoothly?
Absolutely not. The next day, Chase called me and he was totally frantic. The whole tone of our conversations had changed because he had been very calm and collected before.
What was he frantic about?
Well, he suddenly had this cost issue and wanted to cancel the whole food order from before, which was almost $200,000, about a third of the original deal, and order new cheap food.
Were these changes feasible?
Absolutely not. I believe this was 9 days before the event was set to start, and these changes were just not feasible. He wanted all of this food for all of these guests.
Objection to outside the scope of the question asked.
I'll sustain as to the last statement she began.
Why did you believe that it wasn't a feasible change?
Well, first of all, I've been in the business for a while, and this was a very short time window and a lot of guests to feed. Second of all, I consulted my warehouse manager, Carol, who's actually my mom. She's not ready to retire, but I consulted Carol about it, and she agreed with me. These were not feasible changes, so I tried to tell Chase that, but he went off the map, and he wouldn't answer his phone for days.
Were you ever able to contact Chase Ford before the event?
No, I wasn't. It was so unprofessional and so frustrating.
What did you decide to do about the changes he had asked for?
Well, when I couldn't contact him and I couldn't tell him that these were not feasible changes, that it would be next to impossible to provide what he asked for, I decided to go ahead with the orders. I just didn't feel good about not being able to communicate with him.
In the end, were you able to provide what he asked for in time for the festival?
All things considered, I think I did a pretty good job. I got everything to the island on time that he had requested, except a shipment of water was late due to one of my employees quitting because of the chaos Chase caused, and my suppliers didn't supply me with all the bread I ordered. So we made up for that as gracefully as we could and got it to the island.
Did you ever tell Mr. Stirgram about Chase's initial unpreparedness?
No, I did not.
Did you ever tell Mr. Stirgram about Chase's sudden change in the entire order?
I didn't, no.
Did you ever tell Mr. Stirgram about Chase's sudden cutting off of all contact?
No.
Did you ever tell Mr. Stirgram about any of the process that you went through with Chase Ford?
No, I never spoke with Instagram.
No further questions.
Redirect. I'm sorry. Where are we?
Cross-examination.
Thank you.
May it please the court? Miss Wallace, you have been in business for many years, haven't you?
I would say many. I've owned my business for about 7 years, but my dad's run it. He's talked about it around me, and he's trained me.
So that is a yes, you have worked for several years?
Several years, yes.
And in this time, you have supplied food for various events, correct?
That's correct.
Similar to that of the Satire Spectacle, isn't that true?
That's correct.
But never before the Satire Spectacle had you ever worked on an event that the defendant promoted, had you?
I don't know. I just talked to the CEOs in general, but I don't know who would have promoted those events that I supplied for.
So it's your testimony that you don't know about the business affairs that you work on?
That's not correct. It's not within my business contract, or it's not reasonable for me to be part of the advertisement part of somebody else's business.
But you don't in fact know if you had or hadn't worked with Stirgram before then. That's what you're saying, isn't it?
I have never directly worked with Instagram.
But you would agree with me that before the Satire Spectacle, which Naylor Stirgram promoted, never had you ever had to appear in court on behalf of your company, had you?
No, I have not.
And similarly, never had you ever, prior to the Satire Spectacle, had a business failure of this magnitude, had you?
Unfortunately, this was a huge issue, and
Objection,
this
Your
is
Honor.
my first.
The witness has become non-responsive.
Sustain.
Yes or no, prior to the Satire Spectacle, you had never had a business failure of this magnitude, had you?
That's correct.
Now let's actually look at your incentive for wanting to cater the Satire Spectacle. Your standard protocol is to have a 40% down payment for the overall event, correct?
That is correct.
But you previously testified that you waived this down payment for a celebrity substitute, correct?
That's correct, because the purpose of the down payment is to secure.
Your Honor, move to strike everything after that's correct as non-responsive.
Sustain.
Now, you would agree with me that this celebrity, Naylor Stirgram, ensured the success of the event, correct?
I'm not sure what ensured the success of the event.
So it's your testimony that you substituted the down payment without guaranteeing your return of investment?
Well, my intention was, I'm sorry, I can't answer yes or no. My intention was to get a celebrity on board to guarantee the success, but I'm not sure what actually would guarantee the success, and I don't think it was a success.
But you have previously testified that the reason you substituted the down payment for a celebrity like Naylor Stirgram was because you thought it would ensure the success of the event. You did testify to that, yes?
That's the intention, yes.
And so you would agree with me that it was reasonable for you to cater the event after Naylor Stirgram signed on to promote, correct?
Yes.
Now, let's actually look at the Texoma Alternative article, Exhibit 8. That's in front of you, isn't it?
I'm so sorry. It's kind of a mess up here. Let me... Is it 8? 8? Just 3? Yes. Yes.
Now, you actually saw this article prior to the event, didn't you?
Yes, sir, I did.
And you previously testified on direct examination that this raised concern. Isn't that correct?
Absolutely, it did.
And a reason that you gave for not pulling out of the Satire Spectacle is because you are concerned about what Naylor Stirgram might say if you did, correct?
That's one of the reasons, yes.
And you also testified that Stirgram could ruin your reputation. Isn't that true?
Any bad publicity could, especially on with Instagram's following.
So that's a yes to my question?
Yes, any bad publicity could.
Additionally, you also said that Naylor Stirgram could prevent you from ever working again. That's true, isn't it?
Bad publicity could
Objection,
prevent me
Your Honor. The witness again has become non-responsive.
Overrule.
Now, let's look at the reason why you're testifying here today. You said that you blame Chase Ford for the failure and bankruptcy of your business, correct?
That's correct.
And you claim that you will never forgive him. Isn't that true?
Yes.
And you're testifying against him today, aren't you?
Well, I am just giving my side of the story.
But just to be clear, you are on the defense. You're testifying for the defense today, correct?
That's correct.
And Chase Ford is on the plaintiff, isn't he?
Yes.
No further questions at this time, Your Honor. I now pass the witness.
All right. Redirect.
Brief redirect, Your Honor. Ms. Wallace, would you please just explain for the jury what you were concerned about when it came to what Mr. Stirgram might say?
Well, if I did a poor job in business and it got like on this big of a scale for this kind of event, it was within every influencer's ability to put that out there, like give all of their followers that information. So any bad publicity could ruin my business reputation, and that would affect my business in the future.
Did you ever have any interaction with Mr. Stirgram?
No, I did not.
No further questions.
Recross.
Brief recross, Your Honor. Ms. Wallace, just to be clear for the jury, you did say that Naylor Stirgram could prevent you from ever working again, yes?
I never directly said that. I don't think I've ever explicitly said that.
So it's your testimony that you have never previously said this?
I have never said that Instagram can prevent me from ever working again. Bad publicity can, and Instagram can put out bad publicity.
So then, by the transitive property, you would say that Naylor Stirgram could put you out of work, correct?
Sure.
No further questions at this time, Your Honor.
You may step down. Call your next witness.
Your Honor, the defense calls Jackie Gleason to the stand. May I proceed?
You may.
Good evening, Miss Gleason. Please introduce yourself to the jury.
Hi, my name is Jackie Gleason. And is it hot in me, or is it hot in here, or is that just me?
It's hot in here. Especially under this.
Oof.
Miss Gleason, please tell us about yourself.
Well, as you can probably tell, I'm a pretty famous stand-up comedian. I'm also 42 years young this year. Most people say I could pass for a high school student, though. And yeah, I'm just happy to help in any way I can today.
How do you know Naylor Stirgram?
Naylor is one of my best friends. I met him several years ago, or not several years ago, just a while ago, when I was doing stand-up at one of his comedy events, or no, sorry, one of his birthday parties. And we just got chatting afterwards and really hit it off. Apparently, my cheerful attitude was a positive influence on him.
How did you find out about the satire spectacle?
Naylor asked me if I wanted to be roasted at the end of it.
What was your response?
I told him, of course. Just like Oprah's always like, you get a car, you get a car. I like to be like, you get a favor, you get a favor. So this was an opportunity to give Naylor a favor and have fun.
Did you do anything to prepare for the event?
Yes. Naylor and I actually got to visit the island where the satire spectacle was going to be held before it actually happened. And when I heard that the island was called Yarborough Island, I was like, yeah, bro.
Ms. Gleason, how long before the event did you visit the island?
It was 12 days before the satire spectacle.
What was the condition of the island when you got there?
It was obviously still in construction for the satire spectacle. There were a lot of porta potties there. Honestly, I could use one of those right now. But anyways, it was obviously still in construction. And to me, I don't personally like to be critical, but it did seem a little bit behind schedule.
Was there anything in particular that caught your eye on the island?
Yes, the main stage actually caught my eye just because Naylor and I were walking by it, and I hopped up on there to practice one of my routines. So I noticed that it wasn't yet completed, but that was not a big concern for me.
Why weren't you concerned?
Not to flex on y'all, but I perform at a lot of comedy events. And the last thing they're always setting up there is the main stage. So I told Naylor that seemed normal.
Was there anything on the island you were concerned about?
I mentioned that construction did seem a little bit behind schedule, so yeah, general construction was a concern for me.
Did you bring up these concerns with anyone?
Yes, I made sure to tell Naylor that it bothered me, but he reassured me that Chase had said everything was proceeding just fine.
After you and Mr. Stirgram were assured everything was proceeding just fine, what did you do?
Well, I was talking to him while we were heading to the helicopter to go home, so we just proceeded with our plans and headed home.
Now, let's talk about the actual event. When did you arrive?
Well, it was actually on June 29th when Naylor, 3 other comedians, and I all met up on mainland Texoma, but Naylor couldn't come over with us because his friend had just been checked into rehab, and yeah, it was really sad for him, so that kind of threw off our plans.
What did you and the other comedians do?
We decided that we'd make the best of it, and yeah, we just decided we'd head on over to Yarborough Island without Naylor.
What did you do once you got there?
We walked up to the compound. That was Chase's name for the house where the comedians were staying at. And we settled in. We even played a couple games, and I was our team leader. That was really fun. Yeah.
Did things continue to go smoothly?
Personally, I don't like to say that things go badly, but I will say things went differently. See, I headed out onto the deck of the compound to just get out of the house, and I could see that the beach was getting a little crazy from the deck.
How was the beach crazy?
My first thought when I saw it was obstacle courses, because I just love those. And people were running in and out of their tents, and yeah, it looked like an obstacle course, but just a little more hectic.
Did things ever calm down?
No way. Later that night, this giant storm smashed into the island, and the compound was shaking. I was terrified that night. And yeah, I felt really bad for the people that had to be out on the beach.
Was there anything in the forecast about a storm?
No, the forecast looked great beforehand.
Miss Gleason, did you have any reason to believe the event would fail?
No way. I was so excited for the event. First of all, the weather had looked awesome beforehand, and then just 12 days before, Chase had said that everything was proceeding just fine. So, no, I was really hyped up for the event.
Thank you, Miss Gleason. No further questions, Your Honor.
Cross-examination.
Yes, Your Honor. Before I begin, may I inquire as to how much time I have left?
6 minutes and 6 seconds.
Good evening, Ms. Gleason. Let's discuss the events leading up to the satire spectacle. You actually visited Yarborough Island with Naylor Stagram on June 18th, isn't that right?
Yes, ma'am, it is.
And prior to this visit, Naylor actually showed you some promotional materials, isn't that right?
He did, yes.
And Exhibit 9 is in front of you, correct?
I think it's in this stack. Let me find it real quick.
Your Honor, permission to approach the witness.
You may.
I don't see it. Oh, sorry.
Now, these are a copy of the promotional materials that Naylor Stagram showed you, correct?
Yes, ma'am, they are.
And on the first page of these exhibits is the word glamping, correct?
Yes.
And as you know, glamping stands for glamorous camping, doesn't it?
Yes, I love those word combinations. It does.
Now, Ms. Gleason, the second page of this exhibit shows a drawing of the housing promised to some of the expected attendees. Isn't that right?
It shows a picture of a house. I wasn't sure what that was because it said glamping, but there's a picture of a house on here.
But you would agree with me that this is a house, correct?
Yes, ma'am.
Now, Exhibit 4 is also in front of you, correct?
I assume so. Let me look.
Your Honor, permission to approach the witness.
You may.
Sorry.
Now, as you know, there were an expected 5,000 attendees for the satire spectacle, isn't that right?
Yes, that's the amount of people that I thought were coming.
And Ms. Gleason, these are the types of tents that you saw with Naylor Stirgram on June 18th, correct?
Yes.
And wouldn't you agree with me that this picture in Exhibit 4 looks nothing like the house that's being promoted in Exhibit 9?
No, it looks more like glamping.
Right. Now, Ms. Gleason, let's discuss what you did after seeing some of these things on the island.
Okay,
You
cool.
then hiked up to the compound, correct?
Yes, we did. That was a tough hike for me.
And you then met with Chase Ford, correct?
We did, yes.
However, you got a phone call from your agent that lasted 20 to 30 minutes, right?
Yes, I had to step out of the room to take that call.
Right, so just to be clear, Chase and Naylor were not in the same room as you when you took this call, were they?
No, I didn't want to. I just stepped out.
If Chase and Naylor had been discussing with the events, discussing issues with the event, you didn't hear anything, did you?
I had no idea what they were discussing because, yeah, I was in the other room.
So just to be clear, you did not hear anything because you were taking that phone call?
Yes, ma'am.
Now, when you returned to the room, Naylor actually abruptly ended her conversation with Chase Ford, correct?
Yes, she did.
And then she immediately announced that you two had to leave the island, right?
Yeah, I was expecting a sleepover, so I got kind of gypped out there, I thought, but...
Right, she announced this despite the fact that you were planning on staying overnight at the island.
Yeah, the sleepover.
Now, Ms. Gleason, let's discuss the morning of the satire spectacle. You flew from Miami to Texoma with Naylor Stirgram, correct?
I did, yes.
However, Ms. Stirgram never got the chance to fly with you to Yarborough Island.
No, like I said earlier, he had to leave to be with a friend in rehab.
And just to be clear, Ms. Gleason, you previously testified that Naylor Stirgram is your best friend, correct?
Yeah.
And you're actually testifying on behalf of Naylor Stirgram today, aren't you?
I'm on the defense, so I guess so, yeah.
Okay, thank you. No further questions at this time, Your Honor.
Redirect.
No redirect, Your Honor.
All right. Thank you. You may step down.
Your Honor, at this time, the defense rests.
All right. Allow a minute before your closing arguments. Get your thoughts together.
Your Honor, during this time, may I retrieve Exhibit 1?
You may. Is the plaintiff ready to present your closing statement?
Yes, Your Honor. May it please the court. Your Honor, members of the jury. When Carlin George was heading to the satire spectacle on June 29th, she was expecting to attend the most spectacular comedy event ever. But instead, she woke up in a hospital having contracted a waterborne illness. How did what was promoted as an incredible comedy event nearly turn into the death of Mrs. George? Today, you have heard that it was because of a greedy and powerful promoter, the defendant, Mr. Stirgram. Evidence has shown that on June 19th, Mr. Stirgram threatened and demanded that the satire spectacle continue so that he could earn his massive commission from ticket sales. That's why, on the very next day, June 19th, we heard the defense's own witness, Sean Wallace, testify to the fact that Chase Ford seemed panicked and called to change the entire food order. Chase Ford was fearing for the livelihoods and careers of his employees and the potential that Naylor Stirgram had to ruin them. So he was forced to follow through with the event with very limited working time. Naylor Stirgram left Chase Ford with no choice. Since Stirgram prevented the event from being canceled and continued to promote it, Mrs. George showed up to Yarborough Island on June 29th. And once she was stuck there, she realized that the island was scarce on resources and was left with no option but to consume water that later made her sick. Members of the jury, as the plaintiff, it was our burden to show you, by a preponderance of the evidence, that Naylor Stirgram was aware of the disastrous setup of the satire spectacle, that he continued to promote the event anyways, and that Mrs. George reasonably relied on these promotions and suffered an injury as a result. Members of the jury, not only have we met that burden, but we have shown you that the sole reason we are here today is because Mr. Stirgram manipulated both Chase Ford and Carlin George and left them with no choices. As to the first point, evidence has shown that Mr. Stirgram was well aware of the disastrous setup of the satire spectacle prior to its start date. We heard eyewitness testimony from Murphy Edwards, who said that he saw Naylor Stirgram walk in and around the disastrous setup on Yarborough Island on June 18th, including rickety tents and a half-built stage. We even heard Mr. Stirgram himself testify to the fact that he saw no houses on Yarborough Island, even though he knew from his promotional materials that his fans were promised multiple houses. Now that brings us to our second point, that Mr. Stirgram continued to promote the satire spectacle even after he witnessed the disastrous setup. Mr. Stirgram so adamantly opposed the cancellation of the event in the first place because he knew he would lose his $125,000 minimum commission from ticket sales if the event were canceled. That's why there's a 5-page collection of Mr. Stirgram's chirps right in front of you, where he practically begged his fans to attend the event so it wouldn't get canceled and he would get his commission. That brings us to our third and final point, that Mrs. George reasonably relied on Mr. Stirgram's promotions and unfortunately suffered an injury as a result. You have heard testimony here today that Mr. Stirgram was an official source of information for the satire spectacle. And since he never mentioned anything about the event going downhill, but instead dismissed people who criticized the event, Mrs. George made what seemed to be a reasonable choice by attending the satire spectacle. But once she got there, she realized she had been lied to, and she was forced to drink water that made her sick. Members of the jury, the fact of the matter is that this case is about choices. Naylor Stirgram threatened Chase Ford and prevented him from canceling the satire spectacle. Naylor Stirgram left Chase Ford with no choice. And Naylor Stirgram knowingly brought Carlin George to a disastrous Yarborough Island, where Mrs. George unfortunately got sick. Naylor Stirgram left Carlin George with no choice. But now, members of the jury, you still have your choice. It's time to right this wrong and hold Naylor Stirgram liable for defrauding Carlin George. Thank you.
Defense?
May I proceed?
Yes, you may.
Your Honor, opposing counsel, members of the jury, the plaintiff has tried to paint a picture of deception, tried to claim that Naylor Stirgram misled his fans or that Chase Ford didn't have a choice. But in reality, it was because of the choices that Chase Ford made that the satire spectacle was such a disaster. Let's revisit the analogy you heard at the beginning of today's trial. You're walking down the street and you see a person holding a sign that says, "World's Best Coffee." This person isn't making the coffee. They haven't even tried it. They were simply paid to hold the sign. You get a cup, and it's the worst coffee you've ever tasted. Clearly, the person making the coffee is responsible for its poor quality. But today, the plaintiff has decided to sue the person holding the sign. The evidence has made one thing clear today. Naylor Stirgram did not cause the failure of this event or the injuries suffered by the plaintiff. His job was simple: posting positive things about the festival to get his fans to buy tickets. Everything else was on Chase Ford. In fact, you heard Mr. Ford testify today that it wasn't Naylor Stirgram's responsibility to make sure that shelter was adequate. It wasn't his job to make sure there was enough food and water on the island. It wasn't his responsibility to cancel the festival. It was Chase Ford's, and he chose not to. In fact, the only reason that Mr. Stirgram is being sued today and not Chase Ford is because Chase Ford is bankrupt. Not only was Naylor Stirgram uninvolved in everything going on behind the scenes of the festival, he was unaware. Today you heard from the food supplier who told you how Chase Ford kept everyone in the dark about preparation. The construction worker told you about all the necessities Chase Ford didn't provide. The plaintiff told you how the lack of water and shelter on the island put her in serious danger. None of this was on Naylor Stirgram's radar. Chase Ford chose not to tell him. Naylor Stirgram wasn't responsible for providing details about the event or fixing problems. He was hired to build excitement. In other words, he was holding up a sign that said, "World's Best Coffee." Now, the plaintiff has the burden of proof in today's case. This means that they must prove each and every element of the case by a preponderance of the evidence. And they have failed to do so. First, they have failed to show that Naylor Stirgram's posts were based off facts he knew to be false. Even after he visited the island, Naylor Stirgram trusted Chase Ford to come through with the event. He believed not only that the festival would be ready in time, but that it would be everything he and his fans hoped for. Second, the plaintiff has failed to show that Naylor Stirgram made specific representations of his own opinion and presented them as facts. But let's take a look at what Mr. Stirgram actually posted. He said that the festival would be fun, the greatest party ever, you'll never forget it, party of the year. He might as well have posted world's best coffee. At the time Miss George bought her ticket, Naylor Stirgram had posted about the festival 3 times. Each post was noted to be a paid advertisement and contained opinions, but not specific material facts. Third, the plaintiff has failed to show that it was reasonable for Miss George to rely on Naylor Stirgram's posts. She read them. She knew they were paid advertisements. Even so, she chose to spend a significant amount of money on a ticket to the festival. And when she came across an article that raised specific concerns about the event, she chose to disregard it. Finally, Carlin George wasn't injured because Naylor Stirgram said that the festival would be fun. Carlin George got sick because Chase Ford failed to adequately prepare the island for guests. When you purchase a bad cup of coffee, is the person holding the sign to blame? Is the celebrity who advertised for the event responsible? Of course not. Find Naylor Stirgram not liable. Thank you.
Plaintiff rebuttal argument?
Yes, Your Honor. May it please the court, Your Honor, members of the jury. It's already in evidence here today that when Carlin George clicked the link from Naylor Stirgram's Chirpster account, all of the things that opposing counsel, that the defense denied Naylor Stirgram promised, were actually there. There were the villas, there was the water, and there was the food. Now, let's get straight to the facts. This case isn't about Naylor Stirgram promoting coffee. It's not about her promoting or being responsible for what's in that coffee. That's not what fraud is about. It's about her knowing that the coffee could very well hurt people, yet her still promoting the coffee, and as a result, the person that she promoted it to getting sick. A simple analogy hides all of the gray area that we've seen in the case today, but the fact of the matter still stands. Mr. Stirgram knew that the satire spectacle was going to be disastrous, but he promoted it anyways. And as a result, Mrs. George unfortunately suffered an injury. Don't compare coffee to Mrs. George's injury. Find Naylor Stirgram liable.
Members of the jury, you are retired to deliberate your verdict. We stand in recess while the jury deliberates. My name is Lana Myers, and I'm a judge in real life. I'm a judge on the 5th District Court of Appeals in Dallas, and before I came to the Court of Appeals, I was a criminal district court judge in Dallas County. So I'm in my 25th year of real judging. And I'm also a former chair and vice chair of the high school mock trial committee, and have been judging high school mock trial, the Texas high school mock trial competition since the 80s. And you all never disappoint me, and that's why I've stayed in this for all these many years, because it is just so remarkable to me that you all have put in the time, and it's clear, it's obvious how much time both teams have spent in preparing for this competition. And also just the physical and mental stamina is also impressive, because I know that you all have been competing now for quite some time. So I cannot applaud you enough, both teams, for an outstanding performance in this final competition. And I want to introduce our very fine jurors in this case. So if you would just introduce yourselves, starting on the back row, and just tell us a little bit about what you do.
My name is Brenda Height. I'm a trial lawyer, have been for 44 years. Get my words out. Professional liability, medical malpractice, and estate and Parkland in-house.
My name is Justin Gobert. I am also in-house at an education company here in Dallas, and also have the great privilege of serving as the president of the Dallas Association of Young Lawyers.
Dennis May, I've got a solo practice here in Dallas. I do mostly family law. And as to our education, I did hear an objection this year. I presided over a dozen trials before this. I'm going to use it someday, even though I did not allow it in. Objection, hearsay. I'm not offering the truth of the matter, sure that it was a lie. That is there, but I am going to use it myself.
Good evening, my name is John Sholden. I'm a district court judge now, but I can tell you this competition's been going on since 1979, and it's come a long way. Y'all are a lot better. I know because I was actually on the 1979 team that won it. So, congratulations, y'all have gone a long way. I will tell you back then we only had 6 people on our team. I will tell you that 4 became attorneys. So congratulations. Y'all have a great career ahead of you.
My name's Robert Toby. I'm a commercial litigator with the law firm of Johnston, Toby, Baruch here in Dallas. I'm also pleased and honored this year to be the president of the Dallas Bar Association, and terrific round this year, just like it has been in prior years when I've judged, and congratulations to all of you for a great job.
I'm Tom Goranson. I have a family law practice, 3 offices in Dallas, Plano, and Austin. I think this is my 33rd year of practicing law, and just have to say it's amazing to be able to judge all of these young people. And you kids, I hope that's an appropriate term, should be really appreciative of your sponsors and your teachers, because we get to see, I've judged 15 rounds, and a couple others have judged almost that many, if not that many. And we get to see teams that don't have the sponsors and teachers that you guys have, and they really help you become much better in performing. You guys do a great job. Thank you.
All right. I'm Kevin Anders. I'm the vice chair on the mock trial committee, and I'm a compliance attorney here in Dallas. And I just want to reiterate this great opportunity that y'all have to participate in this competition, because up in Oklahoma I didn't have this, and believe me, this is a really cool thing y'all get to do. The skills you learn will suit you whatever you do.
And I'm Galen G. I'm a family lawyer also, and I also do some child protection law. And I've been doing this since been doing family law since 1999. Been a lawyer since 1992. And so I hope to see you all one day at the courthouse if you keep going through law school before I retire. So.
My
name's Jim Young. I'm a lawyer, arbitrator, mediator, and professor here in the Dallas area. I'm also a longtime assistant coach at the University of Texas at Dallas. I coached the mock trial team and the mediation team there. I've been judging this competition for a long time. I'm thrilled to come every year, and every year I leave with rejuvenated faith in our futures. Thank you all for what you do. We really enjoy it.
Thank you. Okay, it is a privilege and an honor for me to now introduce our winners. We have 2 third-place winners, Carrollton Creekview High School. Our other third-place winner is Judge Barefoot Sanders Law Magnet. I'll now announce our second place winner, Lubbock High School. Our first place winner is Covenant Classical School.
Objection. I can say it.